Chapter 59 to 61, The Most Knowledgeable Man. Nestled among the trees, this charming house strikes the perfect balance between spaciousness and coziness. With its carefully crafted wooden exterior and thoughtful design, it exudes warmth and comfort, inviting you to come in and make yourself at home. Neither too grand nor too modest, its medium size provides ample room for both relaxation and productivity. Knock knock. After a fleeting moment, the door creaked open, revealing what lay beyond. "Ah, Alvia. It's you!" the older man exclaimed with a warm smile, his eyes crinkling in recognition. Without any hesitation, the girl released Pride's hand and darted towards the older man, wrapping her arms around him in a tight embrace. She held on as if he was the only familiar thing in this world, her face buried in his shoulder. "Grandpa Clover, I have someone to introduce you to," she exclaimed, beaming as she pointed toward Pride. Her eyes danced with excitement as she awaited his response. Meanwhile, Pride's mind raced with a flurry of thoughts. "It's him. Just as I imagined. Was it dumb of me to reveal my real name to Alvia? I didn't really think much of it." The sound of Professor Clover's voice broke Pride out of his reverie. The older man turned to him with a curious expression, his eyes scanning his features. "Come on in, don't just stand there." Professor Clover beckoned to Pride, gesturing him to enter the cozy abode. "I've just brewed some fresh tea, so do make yourself comfortable." He led the way into the living room, where a steaming pot and a few cups were already set out on the coffee table. Pride took a seat across from Professor Clover and little Alvia, feeling a bit more at ease in the warm and inviting atmosphere of the room. As he settled in, he couldn't help but notice the various trinkets and knickknacks that adorned the shelves and walls, each with their own unique story to tell. Pride took in the details of Professor Clover's appearance, noting that he appeared to be around 60 years old, with a tall and lean frame. His most distinctive feature was undoubtedly his green, oval-shaped beard, which along with the hair on the back of his head, formed a four-leaf clover, perfectly matching his name. Despite the balding spot on the top of his head, a few strands of gray hair could still be seen. Pride couldn't help but notice that the professor's attire was nearly identical to the one from the anime he had watched. He wore a gray jacket with a red and white striped shirt underneath, and instead of pants, he had a kind of men's skirt held up by a belt. The back of his jacket featured the head of a tiger, adding to his enigmatic aura. He sighed. "First Crocus and now him. Do they only have one set of clothes? Please don't hesitate any longer, as the tea may lose its warmth," suggested the professor in a gentle tone. "Oh, my mistake, sorry," said Pride as he took a sip of the tea. "I understand, no need to apologize," replied the professor kindly. "Pretty good tea," he complimented. His face lit up with a wide smile. "This tea is quite special as it is grown in my very own garden." In an instant, his expression changed, his face contorting as his smile faded completely. "But what I'm more curious about is, why is a pirate with such a high bounty here?" "Phew." Pride sputtered and coughed up a few sips of the tea he had just consumed. "How in the world?" Pride thought incredulously. "Alvia didn't even mention my name? Hiaha. Surprised that I recognized you even with a mask." Pride let out a sigh. "To be honest, yes. So, how did you recognize me? I didn't become the director and the most knowledgeable person on the island for nothing. Even with your face partially covered, it was still enough for me to discern your appearance," the professor explained. A grin spread across his face. "Your sword, combined with your overall presence, were the two characteristics that gave you away. That's how I recognized you," he said. Pride sighed and removed his mask. "Wow, you're really handsome, Anai-san," exclaimed Alvia. Pride smiled in response. "You're pretty cute yourself." "So," Dr. Clover repeated the question, looking at Pride expectantly. Pride turned to look at Alvia, his expression contemplative. "It's not an issue. You can speak freely. It won't frighten her or lead her to spread rumors," Dr. Clover assured Pride, as he affectionately stroked Alvia's head. "On the contrary, she'd be delighted to hear about your adventures." Pride straightened up and began to tell his story, starting at the very beginning, since he had plenty of time. He told them about his adventures, starting with his time in Centauria and continuing with his travels to the resort island. Of course, he changed some details so that Alvia wouldn't be exposed to anything too mature for her age. "You've had some very sorrowful, but also quite fascinating adventures thus far," commented Dr. Clover. "Naturally, I'm sorry about the loss of your family and your island. No one should ever have to go through that." Pride took a deep breath and couldn't help but think, sooner or later, the same fate will befall you as well. "Shall we continue our conversation elsewhere? That way, Alvia can continue sleeping in peace," asked Pride. "Sure. Let's continue our conversation in the kitchen." Shortly thereafter, they found themselves seated in the kitchen, each occupying a comfortable chair. Their conversation went on for several hours. "Dr. Clover, I have both a question and a request to make of you," he said. "Sure, go ahead," Dr. Clover responded. Pride eagerly shared his enthusiasm for traveling and expressed his desire to explore the world, uncovering all of its mysteries and secrets. He gazed intently at the professor and continued, "During my travels, I stumbled upon an ancient stone tablet. However, I was unable to decipher its meaning. I was informed that the solution to its mystery could be found here in O'Hara." "Interesting," Dr. Clover remarked, then followed up with a question. "Where did you come across this stone tablet?" "In Alabasta." "In Alabasta, you say?" Dr. Clover repeated, taking note of the location. Needless to say, everything Pride said was made up and not true. These were all events that happened in the anime. The professor was in a state of contemplation, carefully evaluating the advantages and disadvantages of the situation at hand. However, Pride persisted. "I understand that this may not be an easy decision for you, teaching something so profound to an outsider who does not share your cultural background," Pride said, acknowledging the potential difficulty of the situation. "Yes, I agree with you," responded the professor. "Here's an idea. You could teach me how to read the stone tablets, and in return, you can make a wish that I will grant you. It can be anything as long as it aligns with my moral principles," proposed Pride, attempting to persuade the professor to agree. Dr. Clover's response was simply a non-committal. Pride continued, stating his intentions and highlighting the potential dangers that could arise in the future. "In the years to come, I will only grow stronger and stronger, Professor. And as you well know, the same fate that has befallen my homeland could also occur here." He sighed and added, "It's even more concerning when you consider that you're already under surveillance by the world government. They're just waiting for an opportunity to strike, all because they don't trust O'Hara. And I think you're well aware of that fact." Dr. Clover seemed rather sad and lost in thought. "I will need some time to think about it. Would it be all right if I told you my decision tomorrow?" he asked. Pride couldn't help but feel overjoyed and had to suppress a grin, feeling as happy as a child. "Yes, please. I'll come by tomorrow at noon to ask for your decision," Pride said and stood up. Shortly thereafter, he left the professor's house. As Pride stepped outside, he was greeted by the sight of a dark sky, speckled with an array of twinkling stars that seemed to blanket the entire expanse above him. Despite the darkness, he could make out the outline of trees and buildings in the distance, adding to the serene beauty of the night. He was on his way back to the tavern. As he walked with a spring in his step, his mind replaying the conversation he had just held with the professor, a grin spread across his face. "Yes, baby," he thought, feeling a sense of satisfaction and excitement at the prospect of a positive decision. As the first rays of dawn began to peek over the horizon, a warm and gentle glow gradually spread across the sky, painting it in hues of pink and orange. The sun, with all its brilliance, emerged from behind the distant hills, casting a golden light over the verdant fields and rolling hills of O'Hara. The gentle breeze carried the sweet fragrance of blooming flowers, and the air was filled with the cheerful songs of birds. Pride lay in his bed, his eyes wide with excitement and happiness, a broad grin lighting up his face. Despite the lateness of the hour, he couldn't bring himself to close his eyes and drift off to sleep. Instead, he lay there, tossing and turning in sheer delight. With a sense of confidence and conviction, Pride was certain that Dr. Clover would not refuse his offer. He understood all too well the inherent danger that O'Hara posed, and was determined to ensure that every precaution was taken to protect it. "Yawn. I had a terrible night's sleep, but to be honest, it doesn't bother me," thought Pride with a shrug of indifference. Not long after, he got himself ready and made his way downstairs to the tavern to grab some breakfast. A few hours later, the sun had reached its zenith, signaling the arrival of noon. The moment for Pride's visit had arrived, and Dr. Clover knew that he would have to make his decision soon. Shortly after, he found himself standing in front of his house. Knock, knock. With the opening of the door, a smile appeared on the professor's face. "Please do come in, Pride." "Dr. Clover, good morning to you as well." "My apologies, Pride. I completely forgot my manners." "Good morning," said the professor. As they returned to the living room, the aroma of freshly brewed tea filled the air. The professor had been anticipating his arrival. Pride took a few sips of his tea before asking, "Dr. Clover, have you made a decision yet?" Dr. Clover let out a deep sigh. "After giving it much thought, I must agree with you. Your bounty currently exceeds 1 billion belly, and I have no doubt that you will continue to grow stronger in the future." He then fixed his gaze intently upon Pride. The latter smiled in response. The professor added, "Given the intense surveillance we're facing from the world government, it might be to our advantage to have a favor you owe us, that we can leverage at a later time, even if it is in the far future." "As I said, you have my word," replied Pride. He gazed at him with a melancholic expression. "However, I do have one request before we proceed, and that is for you to make me a promise." "Go ahead. What is it?" "I implore you to keep our discussions and what you learn here to yourself, or at the very least, limit the information to a select few," he requested of Pride with earnestness. His countenance grew even more serious as he continued. If, by any chance, the world government were to learn of our conversations, then O'Hara's future would be doomed beyond redemption. You have my word, Professor. Thank you. So, when can we begin? Asked Pride. He let out a deep sigh. I still have some matters to attend to. However, you may come by tomorrow morning, and we will commence our lessons then. Before Pride could respond, someone knocked on the door. Both of them turned to face the door, their attention now drawn to the unexpected interruption. Grandpa Clover, please open the door, the voice cried out. The professor sighed and went to the door. As he opened the door slightly, Alvia burst into the room without hesitation. She pointed her little finger at Pride. There you are. I've been searching for you everywhere. Pride couldn't help but smile. Is that so, Alvia? Well, for what? She grinned mischievously. We've studied enough already. It's time for us to go play together. Pride let out a small sigh in response to Alvia's request. He turned to look at the professor, and the professor met his gaze. The professor gave Pride a knowing look as if to say, don't keep her waiting. He smiled. All right, Alvia, let's go play something together. Before Pride could react, Alvia had already rushed up to him, taken hold of his hand, and began pulling him towards the door. We'll see you tomorrow, Grandpa Clover, she shouted as they made their way out of the house. Pride turned towards the professor. See you tomorrow. Then he followed Alvia out the door. Eventually, they found themselves standing before the house of Dr. Clover. Pride was surprised to discover that beneath her insatiable thirst for knowledge, there was also a playful little girl. So, Alvia, what would you like to do? Pride inquired. She placed her index finger on her chin and broke into a smile. I don't know. Haha, is that so, Alvia? Have you ever experienced flying before? Pride asked. Alvia crossed her arms and responded. What are you talking about? It's common knowledge that only birds and other winged creatures can fly. Pride chuckled. Come on, take my hand. Alvia offered her hand to Pride and playfully stuck out her tongue, asking, So, what's next? Pride started laughing. Hold on tight, okay? Without warning, they both began to levitate, and Alvia instinctively wrapped both arms tightly around Pride as they soared into the air. Nisan, we're going up. Alvia shrieked in panic. Pride gently stroked Alvia's head and reassured her. We're flying, Alvia, just like the birds. There's nothing to be afraid of. It's one of my abilities. Gradually, Alvia's panic subsided and she exclaimed, Really? Okay then. Suddenly, she burst into laughter. Nisan, I'm flying. Pride chuckled and then released her hand. Nisan, Alvia cried out, a tinge of panic in her voice. But when she realized that she was still floating safely in the air, she took a deep breath and relaxed. All of a sudden, they began to ascend even higher into the sky. 10 meters, 20 meters, 30 meters, 50 meters, 100 meters. Alvia's eyes widened with excitement as she spotted birds in the nearby vicinity, and she screamed with glee. This is what it feels like to fly. A broad grin spread across her face. Pride flashed a grin. Want to speed things up a bit? Alvia looked at Pride with curiosity. What do you mean, Anai-san? Boom. Without a moment's hesitation, Pride took off with an explosive burst of speed, and Alvia clung onto him tightly as they soared through the air, zigzagging and weaving through the sky in a slalom pattern. Alvia let out a joyous scream as the wind whipped against her face, and her hair fluttered wildly in the air. Woohoo! She shouted, thoroughly enjoying the exhilarating sensation of flying at high speed. They continued to fly over O'Hara for several more hours, soaring higher and higher until they reached altitudes almost up to the clouds. However, as all good things must come to an end, so did their flight session. Eventually, they began to descend, and Pride guided them back to the ground. To make their evening even more adventurous, Pride led Alvia into the depths of the forest. However, instead of hunting for his meal as he usually did, Pride had bought meat directly from the city to spare Alvia from the sight of any gruesome kills. As the sun began to set, Pride and Alvia settled down around a campfire that Pride had prepared earlier. He had arranged 2 rocks to serve as makeshift seats, and had skewered the meat onto thin, wooden sticks to cook over the open flames. The crackling of the fire and the scent of the roasting meat filled the air, creating a cozy and inviting atmosphere in the heart of the forest. After a short while, the skewers were cooked to perfection, and the aroma of the grilled meat filled the air. Pride handed a skewer to Alvia, and she eagerly took it in her hand. Thank you, Anai-san. The day was truly beautiful, Alvia expressed, smiling warmly. You're welcome, Alvia. We can definitely do it again sometime, Pride responded with a welcoming tone. As she lifted the food to her mouth, her anticipation grew. The aromas wafting up from the dish were intoxicating, and her stomach rumbled with hunger. She closed her eyes and savored the first bite, the flavors exploding on her tongue in a burst of spice and sweetness. But then, something unexpected happened. A wave of emotion washed over her, and before she knew it, tears were streaming down her cheeks. The tears kept coming, and soon she was crying openly, her sobs echoing through the room. "Why are you crying, Alvia?" Pride asked, slightly confused. Alvia took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. She looked up at Pride and took a moment to collect her thoughts before speaking. "Did our day together and the experiences we shared feel like spending time with a father?" She wiped her tears away with her hands. "You know, I never got to meet my parents. They both died when I was just a baby, and the time we spent together just brought back such memories," she said with a weeping grin. Pride opened his arms. "Come here." Without hesitation, Alvia rushed towards Pride and threw herself into his waiting embrace, feeling the comfort and security of being held tightly by someone she trusted. As he stroked her head with one hand, he continued speaking in a soft, comforting tone. "I know I can never replace either of your parents," he said. Then he locked eyes with Alvia and spoke with a warm smile. "But you can always think of me as your older brother." Alvia nodded her head vigorously. "Mhaha." It didn't take long for Alvia to drift off into a peaceful slumber in Pride's warm and reassuring embrace. "Natasha, Elaine, if only you could see this," Pride muttered, a hint of sadness in his voice. "Before I knew it, I have already gained 2 little sisters, Sora and Alvia." He let out a deep sigh, his mind wandering to Naoki and Sora, the 2 people he cared for. "I wonder how both are doing," he said, his voice tinged with worry. "I hope Redfield hasn't let them down." The next morning dawned. After Pride finished his usual breakfast and any remaining tasks needing his attention, he went to Dr. Clover's home. Knock knock asterisk. The door creaked open. Dr. Clover was greeted with a warm and friendly, "Good morning" by Pride. "Good morning, Pride. Please come in," replied Dr. Clover with a welcoming gesture. Pride sighed. "Thanks again for yesterday. She fell asleep, and if you hadn't shown me where her aunt lived, I would have been looking for her quarters for quite some time." "Hee, don't mention it." "Yeah. Alvia, that poor thing. She's had to go through a lot. I'm trying my best to be a grandfather figure to her, but unfortunately, it doesn't fill the gaps." Dr. Clover replied in a melancholic tone. As they settled down on the couch, they each took a sip from their steaming cups of tea. Pride asked, "Shall we start the lesson after we finish our tea?" "Indeed, that's the plan. We'll head upstairs to begin the lesson once we finish our tea." They spent a few more peaceful minutes in the living room, savoring the last sips of their tea before finally heading upstairs to commence their lesson. As they entered, they found themselves in the professor's sanctuary, his personal study and library. It was a cozy and inviting space, and Dr. Clover spent most of his free time there when he wasn't busy with his directorial duties. The space was vast and awe-inspiring, with towering shelves reaching towards the ceiling, stacked with rows upon rows of books. The collection was undoubtedly impressive, covering an extensive range of subjects and genres. In the center of the room sat a massive rectangular table, likely the primary workspace for Dr. Clover's research and studies. It was surrounded by a few chairs and had several piles of papers, books, and notes scattered across it, indicating the professor's diligent work habits. Pride couldn't help but express his amazement as he gazed around the room in wonder. "This room is breathtaking. It's even more beautiful than the public library," he exclaimed as he turned around, trying to take in all the details. Dr. Clover let out a small chuckle. "I'm glad you think so. I did put in a lot of effort and hard work into constructing it. Please have a seat at the table, Pride." The professor gestured towards one of the chairs, and then proceeded to select a few books from the shelf and place them on the table. Dr. Clover fixed his gaze on Pride's eyes, looking deeply into them. "I want to emphasize once again that everything I teach you should be kept strictly confidential," spoke the professor in a serious yet polite tone. "You have my word, Dr. Clover." The professor nodded in acknowledgement. "Before we dive into the specifics, may I ask what your understanding of the poneglyphs is? This will help me tailor my explanation to ensure it is clear and informative for you." Pride took a moment to collect his thoughts, carefully considering his answer to make sure he didn't reveal any information. "I'm at a loss for any other possibilities besides that the ancient inscriptions might contain a message," he lamented. "It's precisely why I made the journey to O'Hara in the first place." Dr. Clover flashed a smile. "Your response is certainly not incorrect. Allow me to begin from the start," he said, taking a momentary pause to collect his thoughts. "The poneglyphs are crucial ancient artifacts in our world, created by a long-forgotten civilization referred to as the Lost Kingdom. This civilization was renowned for their exceptional technological advancements." Continuing on, he explained, "The poneglyphs hold invaluable information regarding the history of our world and the mysterious power wielded by the Lost Kingdom. Scholars believe that the poneglyphs were crafted by the remaining members of the Lost Kingdom to safeguard their knowledge and mysteries for generations to come." Pride was already well-versed in the knowledge that Dr. Clover had imparted, having learned about it through the anime. Nonetheless, he realized the importance of responding discreetly. After all, it would be odd for an outsider like himself to possess an extensive understanding of the poneglyphs and their history without any affiliation to O'Hara or Dr. Clover's inner circle. Pride couldn't help but flash a wide grin. As I had mentioned earlier, my ultimate goal is to unravel all the mysteries of the world, and deciphering the ancient stone tablets is an ideal place to start. Dr. Clover couldn't help but marvel at the incredible books before him, letting out a soft chuckle. However, his expression soon grew serious, as he felt it was crucial to impart some wisdom. "I must warn you," he said solemnly, "that the world government is dedicated to keeping all knowledge of the past a secret. Once you have learned how to read and write the ancient stone tablets, you will become the greatest enemy of the world government." He emphasized the gravity of the situation, wanting to ensure that his message was fully understood. Learning how to read and write the ancient stone tablets could potentially lead to uncovering information that the world government does not want to be exposed, and they are willing to go to great lengths to prevent that from happening. "Dr. Clover, I acknowledge your concern, but my determination to uncover the secrets of this world remains unshaken," Pride responded with unwavering confidence. Following that, the professor proceeded to open the first book. Wearing a grin, he exclaimed, "Excellent, let's begin." As he flipped through the pages, he landed on the first page titled The Language of the Ancient World. As depicted in the anime before, the individual characters were noticeable, but Pride realized that he had never paid much attention to them while watching the TV series. Upon scrutinizing them more closely, he realized that there was no connection between these characters and any language from his previous world. The writing on the poneglyphs is usually large and angular. At first, I assumed that they might resemble the hieroglyphs of the Egyptians. Pride realized that deciphering the poneglyphs would not be an easy task, as there seemed to be no clear connection between the symbols used. Unlike the straightforward nature of hieroglyphs, where a visible image could correspond to a specific letter or word, the poneglyph script lacked any obvious correlation. For example, in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, the image of a leg would indicate the letter B, but there was no such clear correspondence in the poneglyphs. Dr. Clover chuckled heartily as he looked at Pride, commenting on his apparent concentration on the poneglyph script letter. "He-ha-ha," he laughed. "It looks like you're about to make a breakthrough in deciphering the script." Pride let out a sigh and explained to Dr. Clover. "For a brief moment, the script seemed quite familiar to me, which is why I was gazing at it so intently." Dr. Clover didn't seem bothered by Pride's sigh and responded in a reassuring manner. "I can tell you one thing. Learning the ancient language is a difficult and often time-consuming process." He flashed a grin, indicating that he was not deterred by the challenge, but, in fact, relished the opportunity to teach Pride. "But fear not, with me as your teacher, the process will be considerably shortened," he added with a confident tone. Internally, Pride felt a sense of deep contentment. While he knew that deciphering the poneglyph script would be a challenging and time-consuming task, he was pleased that he would not have to spend years in vain. However, the idea of giving up his life as a pirate and following in Dr. Clover's footsteps was amusing to him, causing him to let out a laugh. The sudden laughter caught Dr. Clover's attention, and he looked at Pride with a bewildered expression. "What's so funny?" he asked, curious to know what had triggered such a reaction. Pride's laughter gradually subsided. "Oh, it's nothing really. I just remembered something amusing." As evening fell, Pride retired to his bed, ready to rest after a long day of studying the poneglyph scripts with Dr. Clover. He felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. His mind was still processing the new information he had learned throughout the day, and the mental strain of deciphering the complex script had taken its toll on him. He let out a deep sigh. Mental strain can be more demanding than physical strain, that's for sure. Pride had spent most of the day in Dr. Clover's personal library, listening to lectures and trying to understand the language of the poneglyphs. He knew it was unrealistic to expect to make significant progress in just one day, especially given the complexity of the language and the fact that only a few people had ever mastered it. Still, Pride felt a sense of disappointment at not having made any tangible progress, even though he knew that the first step in learning any new skill was usually the hardest. He closed his eyes, allowing himself to fully relax and let go of the day's events. Patience is key.